They didn't just discover an old secret. They discovered that someone they trusted may have deliberately changed the direction of their entire life. The truth hit so hard that every excuse they had made for the past suddenly collapsed at once. For years, your married soulmate believed losing you was simply the result of bad timing, misunderstandings, and circumstances neither of you could control. But now they have learned something that has left them furious, shaken, and emotionally out of control. Someone may have intentionally made sure the two of you never reached the future you once imagined together. Listen carefully. Because what they discovered did not come from a random rumor. It came through a conversation that was never supposed to reach them. A person close to the family finally admitted that, long ago, someone had been quietly interfering whenever your name came up. Important conversations were redirected, messages were never delivered the way they should have been, and doubts were planted at exactly the moments when your soulmate was preparing to make serious decisions about you. Every time they were about to move closer to you, someone seemed to appear with another warning, another story, another reason to wait. Your soulmate thought those warnings were coming from people who cared about them. Now they are beginning to understand that some of those warnings may have been designed to separate you. The hardest part was realizing how much they had trusted the person involved. This wasn't some stranger standing outside the relationship. This was someone whose opinion carried weight, someone who knew exactly what your soulmate feared, exactly what could make them hesitate, and exactly how deeply they cared about you. That person apparently understood that attacking you directly would never work, so they did something far more calculated. They made your soulmate question whether choosing you would cost them their family, their security, their reputation, or the future they were expected to build. And slowly, hesitation replaced courage. When your soulmate finally heard the truth, they reportedly went completely silent. Then the questions started pouring out. Why didn't anyone tell me? How long did you know? What else was hidden from me? But the question that changed the entire atmosphere was the one nobody wanted to answer. Did they know I wanted to marry them? That question made the room go quiet because suddenly everyone understood this wasn't only about a relationship that ended. It was about a life decision that may have been manipulated before your soulmate ever had the chance to make it freely. They started remembering conversations they had forgotten for years. Moments when they were ready to call you but suddenly changed their mind after speaking with someone else. Times when they wanted to defend you but were told they were being emotional. Days when they imagined a future with you, only to hear that loving you would create problems they would regret forever. Back then, your soulmate believed they were being protected. Now those same memories feel completely different. They feel like warnings that were carefully placed between the two of you until fear became stronger than love. And that is why they lost control. They weren't only angry at the person who interfered. They were angry at themselves for believing it. They began pacing, demanding answers, refusing to let anyone change the subject. One family member tried to calm them down and said the past could not be changed. That only made the emotion stronger because your soulmate responded with something nobody expected. Maybe the past can't be changed, but I deserve to know whose decision I was actually living. Don't skip. Because what happened next exposed an even deeper layer. Your soulmate asked whether you had ever known any of this was happening. That question mattered more than everything else because a part of them suddenly wondered whether you had spent all these years believing they simply stopped loving you. The thought that you may have carried that pain while they were living under a false version of the story hit them harder than the betrayal itself. For the first time, they began seeing the separation through your eyes. Their marriage now makes the situation even more complicated. They cannot simply erase the life they built afterward, and they know that. But discovering that a major turning point in their past may have been manipulated has awakened emotions they thought were buried permanently. They are questioning whether they truly chose their path or whether they were pushed toward it while believing they were acting freely. That realization has created a storm inside them because one truth keeps returning. Before everything changed, they had imagined you standing beside them in the future. Then someone finally admitted that there had once been a serious conversation about marriage involving you. Your soulmate froze. They had remembered wanting that future, but they never realized other people knew how serious they were. According to what was revealed, the person who interfered became frightened because they believed marrying you would permanently change the family dynamic. So instead of confronting your soulmate directly, they quietly created enough confusion to make the relationship collapse from the inside. Your soulmate asked for proof. They didn't want another emotional story. They wanted dates, conversations, names, and details. And when those details began matching memories they had carried for years, their anger turned into something deeper than rage. It became grief. Because suddenly they weren't mourning only the relationship. They were mourning the version of life that might have existed if nobody had interfered. Now one question is haunting them more than any other. What would you have said if they had come to you back then and told you the complete truth? Would you have stayed? Would you have fought for the relationship together? Would the two of you have built the future they once secretly pictured? Nobody can answer those questions now, but your soulmate cannot stop asking them. And there is one final detail that has not yet been fully explained. Before the confrontation ended, the person who exposed everything told your soulmate that there was still one piece of evidence they had not seen yet. Something connected directly to you. Something that apparently proves you never abandoned the relationship in the way your soulmate was led to believe. The moment your soulmate heard that, every emotion in the room changed again. Because if that evidence says what they have been told it says, then the story they believed about losing you is about to collapse completely. The evidence was not dramatic because of what it looked like. It was dramatic because of what it proved. Your soulmate was shown an old record of a conversation that had taken place during the exact period when they were being told that you were pulling away. According to what they saw, you had actually been trying to reach them, trying to understand why everything had suddenly changed, and trying to keep the connection from falling apart. But those attempts never reached your soulmate in the way you intended. Pieces of what you said were apparently removed, altered, or presented without the emotional context that would have changed everything. Your soulmate stared at the details for a long time without speaking. They recognized dates. They remembered where they had been. They remembered the night they were told you had made your choice. They remembered the pain of believing you no longer wanted the future the two of you had discussed. But now, for the first time, they were seeing evidence that you may have been fighting for that future while they were being convinced to walk away from it. That realization broke something open inside them. The anger returned, but this time it was mixed with heartbreak because they finally understood that both of you may have been suffering from opposite sides of the same lie. They demanded to know why the truth had been hidden for so long. Nobody had a clean answer. One person said they thought silence would protect the family. Another said too much time had passed. Someone else admitted they were afraid of what your soulmate would do if they ever discovered the full story. That confession made everything worse because it confirmed something your soulmate had already begun to suspect. People around them knew this truth could change the way they saw their entire life. Their reaction was immediate. They said they no longer wanted anyone explaining what was best for them. They had already lost years because other people believed they had the right to decide which love was acceptable and which future should be sacrificed. For the first time, your soulmate openly admitted that your name had never completely disappeared from their heart. They may have learned to live around the memory of you, but they never truly stopped wondering why something that once felt so certain had ended so suddenly. Then another detail surfaced. Years ago, shortly before everything fell apart, your soulmate had apparently told someone close to them that they were preparing to make a permanent decision about you. They were not casually thinking about the relationship. They were considering a real commitment. They had even started discussing what life together might look like. But that conversation was the moment the interference became more aggressive. Fear was introduced. Pressure increased. Old insecurities were used against them. And somehow, within a short period of time, what had once felt like certainty became confusion. Your soulmate now sees that shift differently. Back then, they blamed themselves. They thought maybe they were weak, afraid, or simply not ready. Today, they are realizing that their hesitation did not appear naturally. It was fed. It was encouraged. Every doubt was given more attention than every reason to choose you. Every risk was exaggerated. Every good memory with you was dismissed as emotion. The people around them made fear sound practical and love sound irresponsible. That realization made your soulmate ask the one question nobody in the room wanted to hear: if I had married them, what exactly were you all afraid would happen? Silence followed. And in that silence, your soulmate understood more than any answer could have told them. It was never truly about protecting them. It was about control, expectations, status, family approval, and keeping their life inside a path other people considered acceptable. The person at the center of the interference finally tried to defend themselves. They claimed they believed they were preventing future pain. They said they thought you and your soulmate were too emotionally connected, too willing to ignore outside opinions, too prepared to build a life that did not depend on family approval. But that explanation only made your soulmate more furious because it revealed the real fear. If they married you, other people would lose influence over their choices. Your soulmate then said something that changed the entire confrontation. They said, "You didn't save me from a mistake. You made sure I never got to find out whether it was the greatest decision of my life." Nobody knew how to respond. Because for years, everyone had treated the separation as something unfortunate but necessary. Now your soulmate was naming it for what it felt like to them, a stolen choice. And then came the part that hurt the most. Your soulmate asked whether you had ever been told why they disappeared emotionally. The answer was no. You were apparently never given the complete explanation. You were left to interpret the distance on your own. That meant you may have spent years believing you were rejected, forgotten, or replaced when in reality your soulmate had been pushed into believing you were the one walking away. The thought of that almost destroyed their composure. They sat down, covered their face, and stayed quiet for a long time. This was no longer only about anger at the people who interfered. It was about imagining what you may have felt. Your soulmate began wondering how many nights you questioned your worth because of something that had nothing to do with your worth at all. How many times you replayed the ending trying to understand what you did wrong. How many times you wished they had simply told you the truth. That is when their emotions shifted again. Anger became determination. They said they wanted every remaining piece of the story. No more protecting names. No more partial explanations. No more deciding what they could handle. They wanted to know who knew, who participated, who stayed silent, and who benefited from keeping the two of you apart. Their current life may be complicated, but they refused to continue living inside a history that had been edited for them. Then one family member quietly admitted there had been a final attempt from you that your soulmate never knew about. Not a casual message. Not a simple goodbye. It was something much more serious. Something you had sent after realizing the relationship was slipping away, hoping it would make your soulmate stop and ask questions before everything ended. Your soulmate immediately demanded to see it. But the person holding that information hesitated because the message had been hidden for a reason. It contained words that would have made it almost impossible for your soulmate to believe you had abandoned them. It showed that you still wanted answers. It showed that you still cared. And most painfully of all, it showed that you had been willing to fight for the future they thought you had already given up on. When your soulmate finally learned what that message said, they stopped blaming the past on bad timing. Because suddenly there was no more mystery about whether you cared. The real mystery became why somebody worked so hard to make sure they never knew you did. And now your soulmate is standing at the edge of a decision nobody around them expected. Not necessarily a decision to destroy everything in their present, but a decision to stop protecting the lie that shaped it. They want the truth acknowledged. They want you to know what really happened. And they are considering doing something they were warned never to do again, reaching out to you directly and telling you the full story without anyone standing between you this time. But before your soulmate could reach out, something happened that made the situation even more explosive. The person who had hidden that final message suddenly tried to stop them. They warned your soulmate that contacting you now could create consequences nobody was prepared for. They reminded them that they were married, that families were involved, that too many lives had been built around the version of the past everyone had accepted. But your soulmate did not hear concern in those words anymore. They heard the same pressure that had controlled them years ago. The same fear. The same attempt to decide what they should know, what they should feel, and what they should do with their own heart. This time, they refused to back down. They said the truth did not become less important simply because years had passed. If anything, the years made it more painful because every decision made afterward had been built on information they now believed was incomplete. They were not pretending the present did not matter. They were not ignoring the commitments they had made. But they could no longer accept the idea that staying silent was somehow more honorable than admitting what had really happened between the two of you. Then your soulmate asked to hear your final message exactly as it had originally been sent. Not somebody's summary. Not somebody's interpretation. They wanted your actual words. The room became tense because everyone knew that once those words were heard, there would be no easy way to return to the old story. Finally, the message was read aloud. You had not accused them. You had not begged. You had simply said that you could feel something changing, that you did not understand why they were suddenly becoming distant, and that if there was still any part of them that wanted the future you had talked about, you were willing to have one honest conversation before walking away forever. Your soulmate could barely listen to the end. That message destroyed the belief they had carried for years that you had already given up. They had been told you wanted distance. They had been told you were ready to move on. They had been told reaching out would only humiliate them. Yet there you were, in your own words, leaving the door open for one last honest conversation. A conversation that never happened because somebody else made sure your soulmate never knew it was being offered. The silence afterward was unbearable. Your soulmate looked directly at the person responsible and asked, "You heard this and still told me they were done with me?" There was no immediate answer. That hesitation was enough. Your soulmate's voice changed completely. The anger disappeared for a moment and was replaced by something colder. They said, "You watched me grieve someone who was still waiting for me to speak." Those words hit everyone in the room because they captured the entire tragedy in one sentence. The two of you had not necessarily stopped loving each other at the same time. You had simply stopped receiving the truth at the same time. Then another family member broke down and confessed that the interference had gone further than anyone had admitted. There had been a meeting years ago, shortly before your soulmate's life moved in a completely different direction. Several people had discussed the relationship and decided that if your soulmate stayed emotionally connected to you, they might refuse the future the family had planned for them. So they agreed to create distance. Some stayed silent. Some repeated false information. Some convinced themselves they were only helping. But together, their actions created a wall between two people who were never given the chance to speak honestly. Your soulmate looked devastated. They asked whether their current marriage had already been part of the family's thinking at that time. The room went quiet again. Nobody wanted to answer because that question connected the old interference directly to the life your soulmate eventually built. Finally, someone admitted that there had been pressure to move them toward a relationship considered more acceptable, more stable, and easier for the family to support. Hearing that nearly pushed your soulmate over the edge. They stood up and said nobody had the right to design their life while pretending it was their own choice. They admitted that they had spent years trying to convince themselves everything happened for a reason, but now they were questioning whether that belief had simply helped them survive a truth they were never allowed to know. They remembered how quickly everything changed after losing you. How everyone encouraged them not to look back. How every mention of your name was treated like weakness. How they were praised whenever they appeared to move forward. Now they understood why people had been so uncomfortable whenever the past came up. It was not because the story was finished. It was because too many people knew the story had never been told honestly. Then your soulmate said something nobody expected. I need to know what they believed happened. They were talking about you. They wanted to know what version of the ending you had been forced to live with. Did you think they stopped caring? Did you think they chose someone else without hesitation? Did you think your love meant less to them than family approval? The possibility that you had carried those beliefs for years became almost impossible for them to handle. One person finally admitted that you had asked questions after the separation, but people around your soulmate avoided giving you direct answers. You were told enough to make you believe there was no point continuing to fight. Nothing openly cruel had to be said. The silence did the damage. The lack of explanation did the damage. The unanswered questions did the damage. Eventually, both sides were left believing the other had made a choice neither of you had truly made. Your soulmate's reaction changed again. They were no longer shouting. They became painfully calm. They said if you had spent years believing they did not care, then you deserved to hear the truth from them personally. Not through a family member. Not through an old friend. Not through another filtered explanation. From them. Someone immediately warned them again that this could affect their marriage. Your soulmate answered that their marriage was already affected because the truth existed whether they acknowledged it or not. Pretending they never loved you deeply would not make the past disappear. Pretending they had made every decision freely would not make the manipulation disappear. And pretending you did not deserve an explanation would only repeat the same injustice that separated you in the first place. Then came a revelation nobody had expected. Your soulmate spouse had apparently known that your name carried unusual emotional weight, but had never understood why. There had been moments over the years when your soulmate became quiet after hearing something that reminded them of you. Moments when they avoided certain places. Moments when old memories surfaced without warning. Their spouse had noticed, but your soulmate always dismissed it as history. Now the full truth threatened to explain emotions that had never completely disappeared. Your soulmate did not want to create chaos, but they also knew silence had already created enough chaos for one lifetime. They said they were done letting fear decide what truth could be spoken. If contacting you changed things, then at least those changes would happen because of honesty this time, not manipulation. They picked up their phone. Their hands were shaking. For several seconds they simply stared at the screen because the act of searching for you carried the weight of every year that had passed. This was not about sending a dramatic confession. It was about finally saying the words that should have been said long ago. I just learned what happened to us. But before they could do it, one person in the room said, "There's something else you need to know before you contact them." Your soulmate slowly lowered the phone. Everyone turned toward the speaker. And what came next was even more dangerous than the hidden message, because it involved a promise made after your separation, a promise connected to your soulmate's marriage, the person who interfered, and one final secret about you that nobody had ever admitted out loud.